Thank you very much, sir. Good morning, everyone. We will now complete our phase of testing of audio and video. Having completed the test this morning, we have the following delegations connected: Argentina, Barbados, Belize, Bolivia, Canada, Chile, Colombia, Costa Rica, Dominica, Ecuador, El Salvador, Grenada, Guatemala, Guyana, Haiti, Honduras, Jamaica, Mexico, Nicaragua, Panama, Paraguay, Peru, the Dominican Republic, St. Kitts and Nevis, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Suriname, Trinidad and Tobago, Uruguay, and Venezuela. We confirm quorum, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good morning, distinguished permanent representatives, alternate representatives, Mr. Secretary General, Mr. Assistant Secretary General, permanent observers, our very special experts, the Honorable Mark Brantley, Larry Quinlan, and Enrique Perez. Ladies and gentlemen, following verification of the quorum by the Secretariat, I am pleased to declare open this special meeting of the Permanent Council, which has been convened by the Chair pursuant to the authority vested in the Chair in Article 37 of the Rules and Procedures, for the purpose of considering the topic titled Incentivizing Work Effort, as contained in the Order of Business, document CP-OD 2367/22, which I hereby submit for the consideration of this Council. There being no observations or comments, we will proceed to adopt it without amendment. Dear colleagues, as I informed you in the special session held on February 9th, in which we had the opportunity to discuss the declining labor productivity rates and the human capital exodus in our region, the Chair convened today's meeting to continue those discussions, this time focusing on how to effectively incentivize work effort in each of our countries. The presenters at the February 9th meeting addressed several causal factors that placed a severe drag on the growth and prosperity of the region. It was Dr. William Maloney, the chief economist for the World Bank for Latin America and the Caribbean, who described the region as stalled and grumpy. There is no question that the revolution in technological innovation has played a major role in influencing growth and prosperity. Virtually every session that one attends today invariably references the importance of technological innovation. Missing from many of those presentations is a focus on the individual, the single most important asset in any production process. Also missing is the reality that technology is most effective when it is built on a solid platform that fosters growth and prosperity, that is robust, with a low debt to GDP ratio, and also has a governance framework which provides the incentives and enabling environment for enterprises to operate efficiently. Although several countries in our region have experienced an improvement in their socioeconomic development, as measured by their scores on the United Nations Human Development Index, there are still economic challenges facing the region. Among them are declining economic growth rates, high levels of unemployment, pockets of poverty, and high levels of public debt. Each of these factors has a dampening effect on the flow of income across the region, making us worse off rather than better off. Setting aside the USA and Canada, which are not in our peer group, the average per capita income for the OAS region is US $16,000. I repeat that again, $16,000. By contrast, the per capita income of Singapore, when it became independent in 1965, was actually in the same pay group as a few of our larger CARICOM countries. Today, Singapore has broken out of the pack and remains close to the head of the global class with a per capita income of US $93,000. The stark reality is that as productivity is reduced across our region, income levels contract, and often the best and brightest head for the exits and seek refuge in the USA, where the per capita income is US $64,000. The very damaging effect of this is the region is left with a residual labor force that is unprepared for meeting the demands of a technologically driven knowledge economy. Within this context, today we will hear expert presentations from our three panelists on the topic of incentivizing work effort. To explore these issues, I now turn to the first of our three experts, the Honorable Mark A.G. Brantley, Minister of Foreign Affairs and Aviation for the Federal Government of St. Kitts and Nevis, and Premier of Nevis. The Minister will draw attention to the fundamentals and the robust platform that St. Kitts and Nevis has built that is well suited for embracing an incentive-based compensation program. The biographies of our distinguished panelists has been distributed by the Secretariat in the following document, CPINF 9308-22. So I'll merely just extract some very significant accomplishments that I think is worth mentioning. I will extract a few excerpts from his most impressive bio. I note that the Honorable Mark Brantley is a lawyer by profession who received his Bachelor of Laws degree from the University of the West Indies at the Cave Hill campus in 1992, and his legal education certificate from the Normal Manley Law School in 1994. He was awarded the Certificate of Merit from the Norman Manley Law School, only the fourth such award in the then history of the law school, and graduated first in class. He also holds a Bachelor of Civil Law from the University of Oxford in 1995, having won the Winter Williams Commonwealth Scholarship to attend the prestigious English University. Premier Brantley has been leading the island during this unprecedented time of COVID-19. In March of 2020, he actually announced that he would forego his entire salary and benefits as Premier of Nevis until the pandemic is over. He continues to forego his salary as Premier of Nevis 22 months after his initial announcement. I am honored to honor this panel discussion with the initial presentation by His Excellency, the Honorable Mark A.G. Brantley, Minister of Foreign Affairs and Aviation of St. Kitts and Nevis, and my own parliamentary representative for the place that locals often refer to as the great metropolis of Bath. It happens to be a short distance away from the birthplace of Alexander Hamilton, the first Secretary of the US Treasury. His Excellency Mark Brantley, welcome to the OS Permanent Council. You have the floor, sir.
Hi, I trust that you can see me.
Certainly can see you very well, sir. Welcome.
Dr. Hull, I now run the risk of my resume being longer than my speech this morning. And certainly I sound quite impressive on paper. So I'm delighted to be here. Let me greet my dear friend, Assistant Secretary General, His Excellency Nestor Mendez. My brother, I trust that all is well with you. And let me, of course, greet His Excellency Dr. Everson Hull, a prominent counsel and prominent representative of St. Kitts and Nevis, who's now chairing the Prominent Council. Vice Chair of the Prominent Council and prominent representative of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Her Excellency Lou Anne Galen Gilchrist. Distinguished prominent and alternative representatives, distinguished prominent observers, ladies and gentlemen, I bid you good morning from the island of Nevis, where I am today, and I'm delighted to be part of this very important discussion. I start by indicating, of course, that I'm not an expert, and I'm happy that Dr. Hull has indicated that there are two experts on the panel, and I'm just along to give some context. It gives me immense pleasure to be here today, albeit virtually, especially at a time when my own country, St. Kitts and Nevis, through His Excellency Dr. Hull, is chairing this august body. Permit me to use this opportunity, therefore, to congratulate our distinguished prominent representative, His Excellency Dr. Everson Hull, for his stellar stewardship of the OAS Permanent Council. I'm delighted, ladies and gentlemen, to share with you a few areas in which the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis has been performing well. a few areas where it needs to improve its performance with the assistance and guidance of the experts who are on the panel today, and how certainly we can best address what has been referred to as a sustained 30-year decline in productivity in our Latin American and the Caribbean region. The decline in productivity, as measured by output per man hour, is deeply troubling. It is an issue of major national concern, and I would suggest major regional concern. It dampens the flow of foreign direct investment to our region. It impacts employment and the flow of income. And significantly, it propels a human capital flight as our best and brightest head for better environments for them to earn, leaving behind in our region a suboptimal labor force that needs improvement in producing the highly valued, technologically driven, marketable goods and services that are critically important for propelling our countries forward. As Dr. Hull would have stated in the February 9th presentation to this August body, the region's performance was described by Dr. William Maloney, the very distinguished chief economist for the World Bank's Latin American Caribbean region, as stalled and grumpy. Being from the Caribbean region, we are never described as grumpy. So this was, of course, quite interesting, the terminology that Dr. Maloney used. As noted by Dr. Hull in his introduction, the question really turns on how do we fix it? How do we reverse a 30-year decline in productivity that has trapped our region in an episode of lethargic growth and limited prosperity? Each of our OAS member states, I submit, offers a foundation on which we can build. For some countries, clearly the challenges will be greater than others. But I offer for your consideration a few of the fundamentals as they relate to my own country, St. Kitts and Nevis, and as they relate to our successes and failures in confronting the challenges that each of our countries face. Of course, where there are successes, we should recognize and laud those achievements and indeed try to learn from each other. Where there are best practices, it is incumbent upon us as an organization to learn from each other and to implement those best practices. Where there are failures, and there are some, to be sure, we must acknowledge those and acknowledge that we have more work to do. It is my hope from the participation here today that our experts on this panel will give some framework and some idea in building out the architecture of a potential response to these difficulties that we face and how we can move beyond being stalled and grumpy. Some fundamental achievements here in St. Kitts and Nevis. We are the smallest sovereign state, as we are aware, in the Western Hemisphere and the smallest state member of the OAS. Notwithstanding our size, we have been able for many decades now to implement free mandatory education up to the secondary level. And I say free mandatory education because it is a criminal offense here for children not to be sent to school who are under the age of 16. We have been the first within the Eastern Caribbean Currency Union to achieve the debt to GDP target of 60% that was established by the Monetary Council of the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank. Indeed, as of December 2021, the debt to GDP ratio of St. Kitts and Nevis was 46.5%, which I believe is quite commendable, and which, in context, we have taken from a decade ago, which was almost 150%. So to move from there to where we are now, I think is quite commendable. The decline in outstanding public debt has produced a series of fiscal surpluses since 2015. And these current account budget surpluses have provided us with some fiscal space for social intervention in delivering a wide range of goods and services, including an earlier entry than most in confronting the social and socioeconomic challenges of the COVID-19 pandemic without having to knock on the door of the IMF or the World Bank, as the case may be. We have been the first among the Eastern Caribbean countries in GDP per capita. As mentioned by Dr. Hull, we are third now among the 34 OAS member states, and our GDP per capita as of 2019 stood at just over $27,000. Net migration rates from St. Kitts and Nevis are among the lowest in our region. And we have been the highest in Eastern Caribbean Currency Union in a number of pre-pandemic total visitors, cruise calls, and cruise passengers between 2017 and 2019. We have made significant strides in the area of technology. Indeed, as a primary response to the COVID-19 pandemic, we adopted a blended approach to education, where our students were equipped with the necessary technological tools, our teachers were equipped and trained with the necessary tools, and we had some face-to-face teaching and some online teaching. And we blended those two approaches, and our students have remarkably performed quite well in the circumstances. We had, in essence, to retool our education system to make this possible. We are currently working on introducing e-passports this year, which will continue to ensure that we are in the forefront of technology. We have also been able to provide digital education to most of our students during the pandemic, and this will now become a feature of our education system moving forward. For 2022, this year, we hope to focus on investing in the expansion of digital assets and infrastructure needed to support hybrid approaches to learning, upgrading the competence of our teachers to effectively engage and support learners in the virtual educational space, and enhancing cybersecurity awareness to improve safety during online engagement and to protect our investment in devices and applications. Ladies and gentlemen, I've given a snapshot of some of the things that we have been good at and some of the responses that we have had, particularly in this context of the global COVID-19 pandemic. However, there's work to do. For example, St. Kitts and Nevis has ranked very low in the ease of doing business. The World Bank's measure puts us as 139 out of 199 countries and territories ranked in that World Bank's ease of doing business. It means, therefore, that we're doing badly on that particular matrix. And so it brings us really to the key issues here as to how do we fix it. As Premier of Nevis and as the Foreign Minister for St. Kitts and Nevis, I will tell you that productivity continues to be a major concern for us. Our people, particularly in our public service, and I believe that this arguably is true for many member states of the OAS, have an approach that is lethargic at best. The approach seems to be low output, and sometimes one may argue no output that we get from workers who are in positions sometimes for which they are perhaps not particularly suited, but are in positions because they have occupied them for a very long time. We have workers who have failed and or refused to update their skill sets in terms of training, in terms of technology. And we have a perennial problem with persons being late for work, persons taking an extra half hour for lunch, persons leaving early in the afternoons. In fact, I can't speak for others, but here in Nevis, we have this notion of showing up late and calling it Nevis time, that we have arrived, and it's a cultural phenomenon, it seems, in some parts of the region, and I can speak for St. Kitts Nevis, of being late because it is our culture. I believe that those are some of the issues, some of the almost cultural and socio-cultural issues that we will have to confront and address. And one of the ways that we can address this is incentivizing performance. The approach now in much of our public service and in some parts of our private sector seems to be that it's a one-size-fits-all approach, and that persons are paid in the public service, for example, according to a scale. So if you are at a particular point in your scale, then you get that salary that is assigned to that scale regardless of your performance. And so the question is whether or not we can move to a point where those that are best in class, those that are performing best in class, are incentivized over and above the norm. And so even in the context of the public service, if one finds him or herself in a particular scale, that there is some type of incentive payment, additional payment that is offered to those workers that are performing, those workers who are at work on time, those workers who are conscientious and who give of their best, those workers who have the public interest and the public service at heart and go above and beyond. And there are some of those. Conversely, if we continue the practice of compensating everyone at the same level. It means that, and I've seen that happening here, the practical approach, that some individuals simply say, well, I'm not going to give that extra effort because there's no reward in it for me. That if I'm going to get the same pay as the person who's perennially late, the same compensation as he or she who's perennially absent, then there's no incentive for me to do more. And so in a way, we dampen down the performance of everyone by not incentivizing the performance of those who do well. Equally, I would argue that if we were to incentivize the performance of those who do well, that will have a bottom-up effect in the sense that others will be motivated. I want to be like him or her because they're making more, they're doing better because of their performance. And so I think that from a public service point of view, this is a serious problem that we have. And we have often, I think, made the mistake of trying to solve that problem by hiring more people rather than seeking to hire the best people and getting individuals there that will in fact perform. And the process of hiring more people has led to a perennial problem throughout our region of having large public sectors with large wage bills. And that has proven difficult for many of us in terms of a budgetary process and how we manage it. I said at the outset that my purpose here was to give some context and some background. It is, I think, a matter that is well worth discussion. I thank Dr. Hull for raising this and perhaps forcing us all to think about how we treat compensation, how we treat incentivizing work effort in a different way. And hopefully this conversation will lead to a change in approach and a change in policy across the OAS, across the member states, and certainly I hope here in St. Kitts and Nevis. I know that we are pressed for time. I know that you're not here to hear from me, but from the experts. And so I will just end by thanking you, Dr. Hull, His Excellency, thanking you, His Excellency Nestor Mendes, my dear friend, and thanking all who are present for the opportunity to engage and to be a part of this discussion and the opportunity to listen to the experts. And hopefully we can continue this conversation well beyond the chairmanship of Dr. Hull as we seek to re-engineer our region and to make us best in class. I will end by the observation that notwithstanding that St. Kitts and Nevis at a GDP per capita of just over 27,000 US dollars, that we are third in the OS and first in the OECS in terms of GDP per capita, that we are still at this point only 1/3 of what Singapore is. It therefore means that there's a tremendous level of work needed. And I believe that the OAS is well positioned through its leadership to change the narrative and to get us to where we want to go, to a more productive society, a more productive community, a more productive country, a more productive region. And that the next time that the World Bank comes to speak to you, that we can say with one acclaim that we are no longer stalled and we're no longer grumpy. Thank you very much for the opportunity. I will now listen offline. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, for your most informative presentation. I must say that you've really hit the nail on the head in several areas. You've identified a number of the fundamentals, which are very, very important. And you've also identified those areas where we've performed well and those where we need to do additional work. So thank you very, very much for that presentation. I am now pleased to offer the floor to Dr. Larry Quinlan, the former Global Chief Information Officer for Deloitte. Born in St. Kitts and Nevis, Dr. Quinlan has over 35 years of experience creating value through inspired strategic leadership. He's a digital and technology transformation expert with extensive experience in complex enterprise systems, integrations, cybersecurity, in complex enterprise systems, in technology, organizational design, and global shared services modules. He is sought after for his understanding of the strategic impact of emerging technologies, including advanced analytics, artificial intelligence, cloud mobility, blockchain, 5G, and the Internet of Things. Dr. Quinlan most recently served as the Global Chief Information Officer for Deloitte, the $45 billion professional services firm. He had responsibilities for all facets of technology and operations, overseeing 10,000 IT professionals in 175 countries. Dr. Quinlan is passionate about improving opportunities in underserved communities. He joined with their CIOs to found the TechPat, an organization committed to bridging the digital divide. He's an avid boater and a scuba diver. Dr. Quinlan, welcome to the OS Permanent Council. You have the floor, sir.
Dr. Hull, thank you so much for inviting me, and truly appreciate the introduction. I'd like to observe the protocols that have been put in place and say thank you for everyone, and it's a pleasure to be here. As you heard, I am a technology leader by background, and as a result, you would expect me to come at the topic through a technology lens, given my expertise. The stage has been set. There is a productivity decline that's undeniable in the region. In fact, there's been negative productivity growth since 2014, which must be alarming to all of us. Investment over GDP ratios have been flat over that period of time. You've heard that migration trends remain problematic, and there is clearly a lack of performance-based infrastructure, incentive infrastructure in the region. And all of these things put together, I believe, create a burning platform for us to act. Some more setting of the stage. If I think of technology revolutions that have occurred, through the World Economic Forum, we've popularized this notion now of being in the fourth industrial revolution. The first industrial revolution, as you know, was largely mechanical, and the second industrial revolution really focused on transportation and communications, railroads and steamships and all of these things. The third industrial revolution then really turned its attention to the whole notion of computing and the ways of digitizing the world as we know it. And the fourth industrial revolution focuses on automation, data exchange, on platforms like the cloud, Internet of Things, cognitive, artificial intelligence, machine learning, and all of those areas. And I believe that this fourth industrial revolution will really have an incredible impact on the labor force, on jobs, on productivity, if harnessed well. It could actually have a negative impact, if not. There's some estimates that say that 40 to 50% of all jobs will be transformed, and in some cases, eliminated. There is, in fact, a potential, a danger of this revolution widening the gap rather than narrowing it between developed and developing countries, unless we figure out ways to improve our productivity and make this revolution work for us. And I would argue that there are, in fact, significant ways of increasing productivity using the automation and the platforms that we see. There's more capital per worker. That's a possibility for us if we choose to make those investments. And those investments then make possible things like truly remote work. And as relatively smaller and underdeveloped nations, The whole notion of conquering time and space through technology and creating remote work and the ability to execute tasks in different territories actually is something that we can harness. Now, there are lots of cross-national boundary work that has to be done, protocols that have to be put in place, but the ability to separate where the work is done and where it is consumed is a truly exciting concept that I believe could work to our advantage and remove some of the infrastructure barriers that have bedeviled us for quite some time. And as part of the fourth industrial revolution, the migration to the cloud, for example, really creates an ability for us to participate in the global digital economy in ways perhaps that we haven't before. There are storm clouds on the horizon, of course, there always are. And regulatory regimes, which are clearly designed to protect certain national interests, do increase the friction in the implementation of some of these platforms around the world, which would allow us to consume them, but still believe that there's really an attractive opportunity for us to participate in the digital economy without the upfront capital expenditures that have made it daunting for us at times. So, some thoughts on where we could take this in the future. First, there is this notion of increased competition. While there are clear advantages to us participating in the digital economy without the capital expenditures, it does increase competition, and increases competition throughout the world. We will now be competing with people that we never see. And that does create a real challenge for us. The increased regulation that I alluded to also creates a challenge. Many of the digital platforms originate in the United States, and there are a number of other countries that have created barriers in an attempt to stimulate the creation of those platforms elsewhere, understandably in some cases. But you put those increased competition, increased regulation, and it then forces us to ask the question, how do we compete and how do we succeed in a world like this? I would posit first and foremost that skill development is a fundamental component of this, what we call tech savvy, the ability for the citizens of our nations to be far more savvy about the creation of technology assets, the utilization of those technology assets, and the digitization of our governments and our economies throughout the regions, utilizing the platforms of the fourth industrial revolution, which include mobility, the cloud, and a number of the other concepts that we're discussing. That without that skill set, without that human capital innovation, that it becomes incredibly difficult to truly exploit the promise of the fourth industrial revolution. And that a consistent approach to creating that tech savvy, to creating those skills, is an important element of our effort to do so. I'm sure you hear this on every single topic, that government funding is vital. That's simply leaving it to an uncoordinated private sector approach. And of course, the private sector is vital and the private sector ultimately determines success, but there does need to be some managed approach to creating a population that is far more tech savvy, to creating technology opportunities, technology training, and the kind of innovation labs and incubation approaches that make our territories, our nations, far more attractive to do business with, far more attractive to make technology investments. And the strategy is required to do that. A strategy that encompasses the incubation, the innovation, the training, the online presence, the selection of platforms. All of this requires intentional strategy in order to ensure that we can make the most of the deployments that we've got. So what would we invest in? Well, the good news is I don't believe that there are significant technologies that will affect us over the next decade that haven't been talked about significantly. I don't believe that there are technologies just hiding from us that will come upon us suddenly that we have no knowledge of. Technology, while it moves at a rapid pace, actually signals its presence long in advance. So things like migration to the cloud become an absolute imperative for us. Investments in artificial intelligence and machine learning, or the Internet of Things. Investments in cyber become truly important to ensure that we can retain the trust of those we seek to serve. Mobility is an important aspect, and those are some of the technologies. But they're capabilities that we have to ensure that our people have. Building software is really the next gold rush, so to speak. That we need populations that actually know how to create software, how to create scalable software, how to create secure software, that this is where the action will be over the next several years, and populations that actually become truly savvy in creating technology assets will win. And populations that know how to protect that and how to embrace and incubate those kinds of skill sets will win. And there are platforms that I believe that we can invest in, such as fintech and crypto and online learning platforms, collaboration. We've talked about e-government and digitizing our economies in significant ways, and allowing those digitized economies to be able to create the kinds of IP that we can then export becomes truly important. If I come back then to the notion of productivity, I believe that these investments are prerequisites and are part of the platform for increasing productivity in our nations. That it is technology, not technology only, but without technology, without the investments in technology, without the investments in the platforms, without the creation and enhancement of the skill sets, without the adoption of some of the platforms of the fourth industrial revolution, it will be impossible to close the gaps. It would be extraordinarily difficult to reverse the negative trend in productivity growth. And that we live in a world today where those investments in technology, if judiciously applied, can help us improve the productivity growth in our nations. Dr. Hull, thank you for the invitation, and I would conclude my remarks there.
Thank you very much, Dr. Quinlan, for your comprehensive presentation. You have provided much food for thought. The innovations that you've mentioned are ones that we need to consider very, very deeply, because the point the way to the possibilities that are there. And clearly you've done a great job in terms of introducing us to those areas that you've mentioned. I'm now pleased to offer the floor to Mr. Enrique Perez, Senior Client Partner based in Corn Ferry in the Mexico City's office. Mr. Perez has been a consultant for a large number of companies, both multinational and local. Mr. Perez helps multinational companies succeed in the implementation of reward programs at the local level. He has helped many local organizations design, and implement performance and reward programs. During the last 15 years, he has developed the Korn Ferry's executive remuneration practice in Mexico, working with private and public companies within the region. Mr. Perez has extensive consulting experience in Mexico and Central America. He works across most areas of Korn Ferry's expertise and has particular expertise in job evaluation, reward strategies, executive compensation, and performance management. Mr. Perez, welcome to the U.S. Permanent Council. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Ho. Muchas gracias por la invitación a este evento. Es un placer compartir este tipo de discusiones a nivel región, y es una preocupación latente cómo mejorar la productividad en nuestra región. Las presentaciones anteriores han puesto un contexto bastante interesante con respecto a lo que está pasando, y hay muchas cosas en las que desde luego estamos viendo nosotros mismos en el mercado que están sucediendo y que nos ponen en una situación complicada como región. Hay avances notables en todo este tema de movilidad y de contratación de personas en diferentes países, y vemos que la región se mantiene atrasada con los datos que ya se presentaron hace un momento. Me voy a permitir poner una breve presentación y platicar sobre la misma. Quisiera empezar recordando algunas reflexiones de Michael Porter alrededor de la prosperidad y cómo esta se basa en la idea de ser productivos. Como consultor en compensaciones en una buena parte de la región, he observado lo difícil que es implantar programas de pago por productividad en las empresas. Hay múltiples explicaciones para justificar esta dificultad. La realidad es que pensar en términos de resultados y de efectividad no es algo que se dé en forma natural en nuestra región. De manera que no basta con diseñar bien un programa de incentivos. Es necesario cambiar la forma en que los empleados consumen su empleo y se enfocan en su trabajo. En múltiples ocasiones uno se da cuenta cómo es muy frecuente que los empleados en el trabajo se queden hablando en realidad alrededor del proceso de trabajo y no del resultado que se espera de ese trabajo. Eso tiene implicaciones, y como bien se mencionó hace un momento, y aquí está una cita del doctor Porter, el tema fundamental es la educación. Nos vamos atrasando cada vez más. Hay una cantidad de opciones para hacer las cosas de manera más efectiva, y eso no sucede particularmente en la región. Lo que voy a presentar ahora son algunos datos que tienen tiempo en realidad solamente para ilustrar estos temas de compensación y productividad en general. Los programas de productividad tienen muchos años. En realidad, los países sajones, como muchos de ustedes saben, tienen más de 100 años aplicando modelos de competitividad que han ido variando, básicamente en función de cambios en las legislaciones, cambios en los impuestos, pero tienen muchísimo tiempo. Y siempre han sido programas cuyo propósito principal es mejorar la productividad financiera y ahora también de las condiciones de vida de los propios países. El tema fundamental es ese: las empresas se enfrentan a cómo poder lograr mejores resultados en el tiempo. Y también podemos ver que los indicadores de un plan de efectividad basado en compensación están asociados a resultados operativos y resultados de productividad del empleado. En general, la construcción de estos planes está alineada a cómo mejoramos el resultado con los insumos que estamos teniendo. Ahora quisiera entrar a un tema que para mí es parte del cómo. Cuando uno pregunta qué es lo que hace que el programa no funcione tan bien como podría, la mayoría de las veces tiene que ver con lo que se denomina line of sight, la forma en que las personas se relacionan con el resultado esperado, y cómo se puede asociar el desempeño individual con el desempeño grupal. Hay diferentes ejemplos de cómo esto no necesariamente incentiva el trabajo. Uno particular que podría poner de ejemplo en el caso mexicano es el profit sharing, el reparto de utilidades. En los países sajones, el profit sharing es un plan de compensación variable por resultados. En México, como en muchos otros países de la región y del mundo, está legalizado. Sin embargo, las empresas no encuentran difícil poder aplicarlo de manera concreta y hacer que el plan resulte efectivo para mejorar la productividad de sus empleados. Este famoso line of sight entre qué hice yo para lograr el resultado y cómo contribuí, no se ve con tanta claridad. Entonces, en donde hay mucho que hacer en nuestra región es en cómo logramos dar la suficiente información a las personas para que entiendan la relación entre su desempeño y los resultados que logra la organización. Voy a plantear un poco el caso de México y perdón, pero claro, es el lugar de origen y por lo tanto tengo datos que me parecen también relevantes tomar en cuenta para esta discusión. Más allá de lo que hablamos al nivel de empresas privadas y empresas del Estado, la realidad es que tenemos un problema serio de desempleo. En este caso tenemos 98.4 millones de personas en edad de trabajar, 58.6 económicamente activas, y muchos subempleados, es decir, con empleos que no ofrecen las condiciones naturales para poder desempeñarse adecuadamente. El problema del desempleo y del subempleo es un problema serio porque todos estos trabajos, la economía informal, como todos ustedes saben, es tremendamente improductiva. 55.6% en 2021 trabajaba en la economía informal. Y no están incentivados. El tema es cómo incentivarlos para entrar a la formalidad. Cómo creamos conciencia de que trabajando en una empresa tendrían mucho más oportunidades. Eso me parece que es algo regional importante de tener en cuenta al hablar de cómo incentivar la productividad. Mientras tengamos tanta gente en la informalidad va a ser difícil, porque el otro aspecto es que los trabajos informales están relacionados con actividades económicas que agregan muy poco valor. La mayor parte de ellos están en la elaboración de comida, lo cual el uso de la tecnología ahí es relativamente menor y no a esos niveles, desde luego. Por lo tanto, es fundamental hacer algo para mejorar la tasa de informalidad y reducir la tasa de informalidad y que haya más empleo formal. Por otro lado está el salario en sí mismo. Es una tabla que muestra cuántos puestos hay en diferentes industrias, tomé algunas al azar, cuál es el sueldo mensual en dólares y el sueldo diario. Lo primero que salta es la gran diferencia. Es decir, 5 veces más trabajar en una industria de telecomunicaciones que en preparación de alimentos. Lo segundo que salta es que la mayor parte de la gente se ubica en los grupos que están a la mitad de la tabla, en la manufactura, en la construcción y en el comercio en general, donde también hay una tremenda informalidad. Entonces, con esta distribución del salario tan distinta, es complicado hablar de manera general de productividad. Naturalmente, esto tiene una relación con lo que acaba de mencionar Mr. Quinlan. Estas industrias de telecomunicación y de procesamiento de información claramente son más productivas que otras industrias y tienen la posibilidad de pagar mejor porque además la gente está mejor educada. Y eso nos lleva al otro punto, que es la pobreza laboral. Es decir, cuánta gente trabaja y gana menos que lo que se necesita para suplir, para abastecerse de la comida necesaria para 4 personas. Esta es la forma en que se ha manejado la pobreza laboral en el país a lo largo de los años. Esto es un tema fundamental. La canasta básica tiene un valor de 57 pesos, que son $2.8. Y son estas raciones de comida las que se tienen. Si el trabajo no alcanza, los salarios no alcanzan para cuando menos eliminar esta pobreza laboral, es difícil hablar de las cosas consecuentes como de las que se ha hablado aquí, de las que soy plenamente testigo, porque además trabajo para muchísimas compañías de clase mundial y orden mundial. Entonces, es un tema que me parece relevante tener en cuenta en esta conversación. Entonces, es cierto que hay que incentivar el trabajo, pero hay que resolver ciertos temas. El empleo formal, donde cuando hay más del 50% de gente en la informalidad, implementar esto resulta prácticamente imposible. Y sí la desconexión entre los niveles salariales actuales y la productividad. Cómo integramos los distintos aspectos de la compensación para lograrlo. Por último, quisiera mostrar un ejemplo muy sencillo de cómo la compensación variable aplica a la productividad en un esquema en el que uno puede decir, bueno, si la utilidad económica tiene la fórmula del retorno de la inversión menos el costo de capital por el capital invertido, pues la fórmula para personas es la productividad por empleado menos el costo por empleado por las personas empleadas. De manera que en el ejemplo que está aquí abajo, si nosotros mantenemos, subimos la productividad y bajamos el costo por empleado y mantenemos el número de empleados, en un hipotético dato como el que está aquí, pues hay unas diferencias muy importantes en las diferencias en productividad. Otro tema que es importante mencionar es que la información que se tiene disponible para poder hacer mucho más análisis de productividad en las empresas y que es transparente, yo diría, para que se pueda analizar con mayor detalle, no es tan vasta como en otros lugares. Esto no nos permite identificar costos específicos que nos ayudan a mejorar, a identificar oportunidades en esto, ¿no? Si ustedes ven este ejemplo de un dato real de una empresa embotelladora con presencia regional, en estos últimos 3 años, a pesar de la pandemia, esta empresa tiene esas ventas que se ven allí, bajó claramente en el 2019 por la pandemia, pero después se recuperó en el 2020 y todo el ejercicio, es decir, la utilidad y la productividad por empleado fueron mejorando a raíz de tomar una decisión dura que fue justamente la reducción del empleo. Entonces, el número de empleo ha venido decreciendo y la productividad se incrementa en el 2018 considerando lo que pasó en el 2020. De manera que, como un ejemplo muy simple, hay muchísimas otras maneras de analizar esto y depende de los datos. Pero pues eso es lo que yo quería comentar. Muchas gracias por la oportunidad y espero haber contribuido en esta conversación.
You certainly did. And thank you very much, Mr. Press. Those observations you made are most important in terms of dealing with the productivity issue. And You've provided us much information for us to reflect on. I'd like to thank you a great deal. Now we've come to the stage of the meeting when we can now open the floor up to the delegates. The floor is now open for your participation by member states. Please reveal your preferences by going to the request for the list. There we go. Ambassador Lynch, sir, you have the floor.
Mr. President, good morning to you, and good morning to the panelists that have been on this morning. Let me begin by commending you for your persistence in dealing with issues that are non-traditional within the sense of what, at least in my experience, of what the Permanent Council has dealt with thus far, in my experience here. What has been presented this morning continues to be of supreme importance to us in terms of our development, our social and economic development of most of the countries that are gathered in this hemisphere and in this august body. My concern continues to be, and I've said this before, is whether or not most of these presentations are best placed within this forum, and whether or not they're not better placed within the realm of inviting through this body real decision makers in terms of government and governance to be able to deal with some of these issues before us. Because I believe at the end of the day that folks like us can only carry the message or transmit the message. I know that these fora are sometimes seen far and wide, but ultimately a person who is caught in a quasi-public type arrangement as an envoy for his country overseas and within a multilateral setting like this finds it very difficult to be able to not only absorb all of the elements of the message, but to be able to act, to be able to change the direction in which we're headed. That said, Mr. Chairman, I just want to reflect on something that was said earlier by one of your presenters, which I think is important. Mr. Perez, Enrique Perez, he talked somewhat about that the majority of our people are found in jobs in low productivity sectors. That was what was said, that the number of jobs that are being created and continue to be created and exist within our environment are those in which low productivity, low wages continue to be part and parcel of how we deal with them. And Mr. Chairman, although I will say this, maybe it is bordering on heresy, part of the problems, the challenges that we have is that we are involved in these sectors for a number of reasons. One is that they're easy sectors for us to enter. If you're talking about small open economies with limited resources and limited access to capital and technology, you're talking about areas in which we naturally will go towards. So you're talking about where our resources naturally lead us over time. And then you're talking about our sociocultural and historical leanings that take us in that direction. And therefore, that's why when we speak about industries, we can't speak about high tech very readily, and we can't speak about areas in terms of innovation and the like, because naturally we've never had access to the capital base that we need to be able to make the transitions out of what we're talking about, and we don't have the technology readily available to us. And therefore, this is what happens. If we're going to make, if these encounters are going to be meaningful, and are going to really have any impact upon how we develop coming out of what we are now dealing with within these sessions. Not only must it be heard by our political leaders, because we can't continue, we can't talk over the heads of our political leaders. But what also must happen is that our access to capital and technology has got to change. And therefore, if we are to make these transitions, we must get access or have access to better areas of our development in a way that allows us to get our hands on these particular variables and inputs to our development. I will say finally, I've heard from the time I was growing up as a young boy in Barbados about the issue of economic diversification and getting out of tourism. Well, not getting out of it, but transitioning tourism and looking for other aspects of development that can lead us to something else. It sometimes sounds like pie in the sky dreaming, because when we ask what do we transition out of tourism into, hospitality and the like, how do we transition out of these low-wage service jobs into these high-tech jobs that Mr. Quinlan talked about, for example, and taking advantage of this fourth industrial revolution? You ask yourself this, you ask yourself, well, where's the base? How do we build the base? How do we create the base? And therefore, the folks that are around us, there's a lot of potential in being a part of a conglomerate. So the Caribbean, and I say, and I extend this to the OAS, in terms of a multilateral setting, there's a lot of potential in being part of in conglomeration, in being a part of something that more of us need to be involved in to work together, because we're never singularly going to get our hands on the resources that are necessary to make that deep transition. And I say this respectfully. If our partners and those that are around us in this hemisphere do not see the value of small developing countries like us to the overall existence of what happens within this hemisphere, we are going to be subjected to the lanes of poverty. What must happen is international financial institutions, larger countries within this hemisphere, and in essence, some private sector partners have got to see the value and worth of small developing countries to their own existence. If you look at what is happening in Europe, why there's a huge conflict, and you go back to the history of the conflict, you realize that people realize that they're dependent on each other for their own survival. And therefore I say this, the World Bank, the Inter-American Development Bank, the International Monetary Fund, you don't want to always end up in the IMF stance, have got to be, and our partners, particularly the larger ones in our hemisphere, have got to be more open about the assistance that they give to us. If you continue to just restrict us, every time you open your doors, you're constrained by you can't trade. There's some barrier put in place. Correspondent banking opportunities are closed. Well, then, Mr. Chairman, we're heading in the wrong direction. And I say this respectfully, that these discussions are more than meaningful if we are to move into another direction. But it means that for that transition to take place, that our access to capital, assets, and technology has certainly got to change. And those partners that we've always dealt with for so long have got to be more open to our needs and to our direction. I thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
You're most welcome, sir. Next, we have the ambassador for Guyana. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much, Chairman Hall and colleagues. And I would make a comment, but I would say, first of all, it is my individual response and not a delegation and a government response. I wonder whether, I think, first let me also commend the persons who presented, starting with the minister in St. Kitts and Nevis. I found them all very impressive and very provocative. I wonder, though, whether in these discussions we are not avoiding some significant constraints. For example, a reference is made quite often to Singapore. And if we look at the history of Singapore, I think we were together maybe in 1960 in terms of GDP and other measures. But our paths were quite different from then. And we chose those paths, or people chose those paths, or you may say those paths that Singapore followed were not open to us. There was their geographic position, which was important. But I tend to see Singapore's development more as a readiness to join with the European white world at the time, whilst we were not prepared to join with them or to have them join with us. So I would say that has been a significant determinant on the differences in the paths that we have followed. I think that we also have to look at the issue of the limitation on size. I think scale matters. I think I saw the line somewhere that scale didn't matter, but I think size and scale matters quite a lot, and in different ways. Certainly, in a large economy, a large place like the USA, things develop all the time. Various technologies rise, and various places have different advantages, and people move. So when the auto industry goes down in Detroit or wherever, Chicago, people can move to California or wherever else development is taking place. I think there was this kind of discussion to awareness when people talked about our countries being plantation economies at the beginning. I think because of our size and to get some benefits of scale, productivity is related to scale, we end up being one culture kind of thing, one kind of a few main economic products. But when things change, we go to zero. And I think that is related to our size. And it happens. We can see it in the large countries, only that their people then can move from one place to another place. I think that we read quite often that there's an urbanization trend in the world at large, and more people are living in big cities. And I would say what has happened to us in the Caribbean is that New York and Montreal and Miami and Washington to some extent, these are our big cities. It's natural for people to move to them. I think to a large degree, our small economies, our small countries and small economies offer more readily kind of general work. If you're a doctor, you're a general doctor or a lawyer, rather than a very highly specialized doctor, lawyer, or engineer. And most of us, if we have some children coming up and they look to be that they could be very good, we want them to come up to America and be at Johns Hopkins University and so on. I say this aware that of the 100 boys who joined Queen's College in Guyana with me in 1955, only about 15 of us spent most of our lives in Guyana. And I must protest the often reference that there were those people who've been left in the countries or choose to stay in the countries are to some extent a residuum. I chose to stay in Guyana until 6 months ago. So I naturally am a little bit objective, and it's a question of what fits. It's a question of what fits. I remember particularly when I was interviewed for a scholarship, the aluminum company, the guy said, our problem is not that you don't have good enough grade. Our problem is your grade is too good. Why do you want to work in this mud of the bauxite mines and not go into computers and rockets at the time? And this was in '63. And that is a question that we have. So when we talk about people moving out and so on, our younger, brighter people moving out. We must bear those things in mind, or we will find ourselves being contradictory, in contradictory positions. Maybe within an hour, we move from one position to another that is contradictory. My inclination too is to think that what we see has evolved, the situation we see that has evolved often is not that bad. And there may be lots of things controlling it, limiting it that we are not aware of, or sometimes that we just don't want to accept. And I wonder about these things. In terms of productivity, growth, and so on, I think some of the issues here. Let me talk now to the question of incentivization. I'm a little bit wary of incentivization, maybe because of being more of a socialist orientation. I'm wary of the approaches to incentivization, and I would say further that particularly in a small society and small groups, incentivization often goes down different paths, because different paths than in a large anonymous group. Maybe if I have 10,000 people in a place and I get an incentivization scheme, rather than having maybe 200 or so on in a public service in Guyana or in a place in one of our places. It takes different routes, and other people have questioned that approach too. Mr. Drucker, the way I've been reading Mr. Peter Drucker, I think that we questioned that. And on the issue of productivity, I'd like to refer to a book by Ishikawa, a Japanese book in the 1980s. And productivity has much more in it, social and cultural, political, than just, and even Peter Drucker talked about one time about the gangs in California. You know, they're very well motivated, and I presume they're very productive in their situation. So maybe my emphasis on this is on the social political, first of all, and not the technological and all those other things. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome, sir. Next, we have the ambassador for Chile. You have the floor, sir.
Muchas gracias, presidente. Señor presidente, resulta muy relevante para Chile la convocatoria de esta sesión extraordinaria del Consejo Permanente referida al fomento del esfuerzo laboral. Por eso agradecemos especialmente las presentaciones del ministro de Relaciones Exteriores y Aviación de St. Kitts and Nevis, Mark Brantley, del exdirector de Información Global de Deloitte, Larry Quinlan, y del socio senior para cliente de Korn Ferry Consulting, Enrique Pérez Sámano. El trabajo decente, concepto promovido desde la OIT por el exdirector chileno Juan Somavía, impacta múltiples ámbitos de la sociedad y mejora la calidad de vida de las personas, y como tal ha sido reconocido como uno de los objetivos de desarrollo sostenible de mayor influencia. En concordancia con este objetivo, debemos propiciar el pleno derecho de la libertad sindical y fortalecer los sistemas de seguridad social en materia de pensiones, salud, cesantía, seguridad en el trabajo y otros, así como el aseguramiento de salarios dignos y la creación de puestos de trabajo productivos, tanto para el desarrollo individual como para el beneficio común de nuestros países. El trabajo decente debe ser una herramienta que permita a los trabajadoras y trabajadores y sus familias salir de la pobreza. Para ello es fundamental generar las condiciones que permitan crear puestos de trabajo de alta productividad y bajo impacto ambiental. Resulta fundamental la adopción de medidas de reconversión y capacitación para adaptarnos a la incorporación de la inteligencia artificial, la automatización y la robotización del mundo laboral, que además signifiquen un mejoramiento en la calidad de vida de los trabajadores y trabajadoras. El trabajo decente es un compromiso indispensable para el cumplimiento de los objetivos de desarrollo sostenible, pero además permite alcanzar o avanzar hacia otros objetivos como el fin de la pobreza, el compromiso del hambre cero, mejoras en la salud y el bienestar, una educación de calidad y la igualdad de género. Además, es indispensable para el desarrollo de la industria, la innovación y la infraestructura. Disminuye la desigualdad de ingresos y la desigual multifactorial. Se incorpora el compromiso de producción y consumo responsables. Mejora los niveles de paz, ciudadanía y justicia y es parte integral de un pacto social que nos incluya a todas y todos. Resulta clave, entonces, otorgar importancia estratégica al trabajo como uno de los elementos consustanciales a la dignidad humana, como medio de subsistencia material de las grandes mayorías, como mecanismo de inclusión y valoración social del ser humano y como un competente productivo cada vez más relevante, especialmente en la era de las tecnologías de la información, la sociedad del conocimiento y la globalización. Al respecto, queremos reforzar aspectos propios de los derechos humanos, reduciendo las brechas de género y resguardando la integridad física y psíquica de los trabajadores y trabajadoras, entre otros aspectos fundamentales. El mundo del trabajo debe impulsar procesos amplios de diálogo social que incluyan a trabajadores, empleadores, Estado y la sociedad civil en su conjunto. Se debe fortalecer las políticas tendientes a la igualdad en las labores de cuidado, terminando con la arbitrariedad en las condiciones laborales y remuneraciones hacia cualquier grupo social, tales como mujeres, migrantes, jóvenes, personas mayores o pueblos originarios. Se debe también resguardar los derechos de los trabajadores en teletrabajo, una modalidad que llegó para quedarse. Es muy importante que podamos garantizar espacios de trabajo seguros para las mujeres, identificando los fenómenos de acoso sexual o acoso por razón de género, siendo ambas violencias de género en el trabajo. También se deben adoptar medidas para garantizar la aplicación a todos los trabajadores y trabajadoras la igualdad de remuneraciones por un trabajo de igual valor. Como hemos visto, señor presidente, en la región debemos abordar muchísimos desafíos laborales, cuya urgencia es apremiante debido al escenario impuesto por la pandemia del COVID-19. Por ello, Chile reitera su profundo agradecimiento por la convocatoria a esta sesión extraordinaria del Consejo Permanente. Muchas gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you very much. We next have the representative for Panama. You have the floor.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente. Primeramente, deseo agradecer esta convocatoria, así como las interesantes y completas presentaciones realizadas por el señor canciller Mark Brantley y los señores Quinlan y Pérez Samano. La crisis producto de la pandemia del COVID-19 ha tenido grandes impactos en todos los ámbitos, incluyendo el laboral, donde si bien ha habido avances positivos como la optimización de procesos mediante herramientas tecnológicas, la regularización e implementación del teletrabajo y la digitalización de empresas, también se han profundizado desafíos previos y creados nuevos, producto de las restricciones e impacto de la pandemia en nuestras economías. En el caso de Panamá, el Ministerio de Trabajo y Desarrollo Laboral ha estado dirigiendo los esfuerzos intersectoriales para brindar respuesta a las necesidades y retos del mercado laboral durante este complicado periodo. Esto desde un enfoque integral y multidimensional, tomando en consideración los impactos en el comportamiento de la productividad laboral en Panamá. De la misma manera, ha procurado, mediante iniciativas, programas y proyectos, fomentar la empleabilidad tomando en cuenta las nuevas condiciones en que vivimos, las nuevas tecnologías y el fomento de los emprendimientos y pequeñas empresas. En este sentido, la Delegación de Panamá desea compartir brevemente algunas de estas iniciativas. Primero, la política pública de empleabilidad e inserción laboral de las jóvenes y mujeres en condiciones de vulnerabilidad socioeconómica en Panamá. Esta busca incrementar las oportunidades de empleo para las mujeres, en particular aquellas que se encuentran en condiciones de vulnerabilidad. Se enfoca en garantizar la igualdad entre hombres y mujeres en términos de inclusión e inserción laboral y responde al reto de acelerar las oportunidades a las que acceden las mujeres, asegurando que no se queden atrás de la recuperación y del desarrollo económico y prosperidad que están por venir. Segundo, programa de apoyo a la inserción laboral. Este programa de becas a través del Mitradel y la empresa privada lo que busca es brindar oportunidad de adquirir conocimientos, habilidades y destrezas a través de la realización de actividades teóricas y prácticas dentro de la empresa. Cada cada parte aporta el 50% de la beca, las cuales son por el monto equivalente al salario mínimo, y en los casos que el becario presente alguna condición de discapacidad, el programa cubre la beca completa. Tercero, en julio del año 2021 se inauguró la Ventanilla Única de Oportunidades, que cuenta con funcionarios de diversas entidades para orientar a los usuarios en la generación de recursos económicos y para alinear las competencias de las personas trabajadoras a las necesidades del mercado laboral. Cuarto, la Bolsa de Empleo. Esta es una plataforma tecnológica para gestionar la exploración de oportunidades laborales, avalada por el Ministerio de Trabajo y Desarrollo Laboral, convirtiéndose en la Bolsa Electrónica de Empleo Oficial de Panamá. Es una herramienta gratuita que permite dar seguimiento en tiempo real a los candidatos y candidatas y a las vacantes de las empresas registradas. Quinto y último, la promulgación de la Ley 186 del 2 de diciembre de 2020, mediante la cual se crean las sociedades de emprendimiento, un nuevo tipo de personería jurídica para facilitar la formalización de las empresas por medio de un sistema simplificado de registro y el otorgamiento de incentivos fiscales a los emprendedores. La operatividad de este innovador modelo para coadyuvar a la reactivación económica pospandémica contribuye a la formalización del emprendimiento en Panamá. Mediante la implementación de estas iniciativas, junto a las demás políticas intersectoriales y el apoyo y acompañamiento de la empresa privada y organismos internacionales y multilaterales, Panamá renueva su compromiso a continuar trabajando para enfrentar los desafíos actuales en beneficio de nuestros ciudadanos y nuestras ciudadanas. Muchas gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you very much. It appears that we have a representative from
Peru.
Peru. Thank you very much. You have the floor, sir.
Buenos días. ¿Se me oye? Buenos días.
Sí, adelante, la escuchamos y la vemos.
Ya, perfecto. Buenos días, señor presidente, señor secretario general adjunto, señores representantes, embajadores, colegas. Bueno, quería empezar por agradecer esta importante iniciativa de la presidencia de traer un tema que realmente es de prioritaria atención a nuestra agenda de trabajo. Quería agradecer también a los expositores, realmente ha sido bastante ilustrativo toda la información que hemos podido recibir, ha sido realmente importante abordar este tema, sobre todo teniendo en cuenta que nuestra región, América Latina, Caribe, realmente en términos de productividad, ciertamente está por debajo de la media mundial, lo que es realmente preocupante. En el caso específico del Perú, me permito destacar 3 temas que realmente son importantes que se aborden en este marco. Uno, por ejemplo, que fue mencionado por uno de los expositores, el tema fundamental de la educación, específicamente la valorización de la educación técnica, ¿no? Que es algo que realmente nuestros países tienen que aprender a hacer, tienen que aprender a manejar de una manera estratégica. Otro tema neurálgico para el Perú es el tema de la brecha de género. Se tiene que trabajar por superar la brecha de género y esto tiene que partir, vinculándolo con el tema anterior, del tema educativo, ¿no? De un trabajo en el sistema educativo. Y un punto también que es de central importancia es la incorporación de estándares en materia de medio ambiente, ¿no? Tenemos que atender el tema del cambio climático y realmente eso tiene que realmente ser muy tangible y verse de manera muy concreta dentro del ámbito laboral y de la productividad. Bueno, muchas gracias por concederme la palabra.
You're very welcome. Next, we have the ambassador for Ecuador. You have the floor, sir.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente. La delegación del Ecuador quiere, en primer lugar, saludar al señor Mark Brantley, al honorable señor Mark Brantley, ministro de Relaciones Exteriores de la Región de San Cristóbal de Nieves, y agradecer su valiosa exposición, así como aquellas muy ilustrativas pronunciadas por los señores Harvey Quinlan y Enrique Pérez Sámano. El tema que nos convoca es muy importante y por lo cual agradezco la convocatoria de esta sesión y que un poco ha tipificado su presidencia, como decía el embajador Lynch de Barbados, permite avanzar en la discusión, en el debate y en la definición de lo que deben ser las políticas públicas y las prioridades dirigidas a elevar el rendimiento cualitativo de los trabajadores, con la visión siempre del objetivo final de aliviar la pobreza, eliminar la desigualdad en el hemisferio y aprovechar las experiencias adquiridas para mejorar los sistemas laborales de nuestras naciones, aquejados por el alto nivel de subempleo e informalidad, como nos decía el señor Pérez, y que la crisis sanitaria no ha hecho que sino exacerbar. En las circunstancias actuales, la recuperación del mercado laboral resulta imperativo, así como también el fomento del ejercicio efectivo de los derechos de los trabajadores, en especial de las mujeres. Recordemos simplemente que el confinamiento producto del COVID-19 restringió considerablemente la participación de las mujeres en las actividades productivas, a que se sumó el mayor peso de labores no remuneradas vinculadas al cuidado del hogar. Según la CEPAL, entre el 2019 y el 2020, cerca de 13 millones de personas que perdieron su empleo fueron mujeres. Se trata entonces de generar nuevos empleos, como decimos, en un país dignos, a los que se debe añadir el fortalecimiento prioritario de las micro y pequeñas empresas. Y digo micro y pequeñas empresas porque estas representan prácticamente el 97% del tejido empresarial de nuestros países, y sobre lo cual sí me gustaría tener los comentarios de los panelistas sobre cómo precisamente ajustar, empatar y adecuar ese tejido empresarial, esas pymes, con lo que ellos bien advertían sobre la elevación del rendimiento cualitativo de los trabajadores. Entonces se trata de incorporar a esas víctimas para lograr un mayor número de trabajadores, propiciar la recuperación económica y productiva que va de la mano con la protección de sus derechos humanos, en particular de la salud, con el objeto de ofrecer respuestas a los desafíos del presente. Al haber ejecutado un exitoso plan de vacunación y haberlo concebido como el principal problema económico, el gobierno del presidente Guillermo Lasso ha impulsado la reactivación productiva a través de la adopción de medidas de prevención para el retorno progresivo y seguro a las actividades presenciales de trabajo, para reducir el riesgo de contagio entre los servidores públicos, trabajadores, empleadores, clientes, usuarios y ciudadanía en general. Se han emitido guías y planes los cuales se adaptan a las circunstancias y comportamiento de la curva de contaminación. Fruto de estas acciones coordinadas ha permitido crear 150,000 empleos adecuados e incorporar a 76,000 nuevos afiliados a la seguridad social. A su vez, el proyecto de ley de inversión por el empleo plantea reformas a la legislación sobre alianzas público-privadas, el mercado de valores, zonas francas e incentivos para sectores estratégicos, a fin de atraer el objetivo de los 30,000 millones de dólares en inversiones estratégicas, como lo han advertido precisamente los panelistas, para cumplir con la meta en el caso del Ecuador de establecer 2 millones de empleos en los 4 años de gobierno para los 7 de los 10 ecuatorianos que hoy no lo tienen. De ahí también el envío en breve de un proyecto de reforma laboral que, entre otros aspectos, atenderá las necesidades de capacitación profesional, fomentando la educación técnica para adiestrar a los trabajadores en esas nuevas técnicas e industrias de la quinta revolución industrial, como nos advertía el señor Quinlan. Concluyo argumentando que se debe privilegiar el uso de incentivos digitales que se incrementaron exponencialmente en razón de los beneficios registrados durante la pandemia y que han generado nuevas modalidades de trabajo fundadas en su utilización. Claro que hay que recordar que nuestra región está apenas conectada en un 38% y eso debe ser un esfuerzo de todos nuestros gobiernos. Y finalmente, decir que esta situación ha ciertamente producido un giro significativo en las relaciones laborales tradicionales que demanda de un nuevo marco normativo con mayor capacidad de adaptación a estas nuevas realidades tan bien descritas por los panelistas, sin enmar, por cierto, los derechos adquiridos de los trabajadores. Muchas gracias, señor presidente.
You're very welcome, sir. I think that we could very much like to afford the speaker, the presenters, to offer their response. Kindly press the request to speak button, and we'd be happy to hear any comments that you may have. Mr. Perez, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you. Solo contestando al comentario reciente en relación con las MIPYMES, hemos estudiado el tema de manera importante en el país. Yo le daba algunos datos hace un tiempo al doctor Hull, cuando decía que en México hay, me parece que 4,5 millones de empresas registradas y el 95% de ellas tiene menos de 10 empleados. Hay un estudio del doctor Levy, que seguramente conocen, Santiago Levy, en un libro que dice Esfuerzos mal recompensados, en el que demuestra que el esfuerzo por generar empresas no es rentable en la medida que esas empresas desaparecen a los 2 años. Es decir, si ya se hizo un trabajo de fomentar a los emprendedores, que en diferentes países lo hacen de diferentes maneras, pues ahora lo que hay que hacer es que esas microempresas se conviertan en empresas, en institucionalizarlas, en lugar de que desaparezcan a los 2 años. Y eso requiere de know-how, de conocimiento y de capital, pero podría haber un proceso más como de incubación de negocios que los convirtiera realmente en empresas, que permita proveer salario y trabajo digno, cumplir con las obligaciones fiscales y mantener a las empresas. De lo contrario, no tiene mucho sentido estar creando empresas que desaparecen a los 2 años. Me parece que ahí hay un área de oportunidad. Eso es lo que quería mencionar.
Thank you very much. His Excellency, the Honorable Mark Brantley, you have the floor, sir.
Hello, Dr. Hull?
Yes, we can hear you and see you very clearly.
I'm so sorry. I had a bit of lapse in my internet. So I just wanted to offer a very brief reflection. I believe that the conversation has been incredibly rich. And to me, there's a common thread that this is a problem. And so I commend you yet again for putting this so firmly on the agenda. I refer especially to the distinguished representative from Barbados, who I believe was the first speaker, who drew our attention to the history of our region and the fact that perhaps we do find ourselves trapped in this low productivity jobs, low productivity environment as a consequence of that peculiar history. And I think that there is some merit to that. I sort of marry that now to the presentation made by my dear friend, Mr. Quinlan, who clearly pointed out that technology arguably offers some solution to help us as a region to move ourselves out of this low productivity trap in which we find ourselves. I believe that technology is the great equalizer, the great leveler, if you will, in this world. Many of our countries in the region, and St. Kitts and Nevis in particular, has a very high penetration rate for cell phones and other devices. Everybody here is connected in some way, shape, or form. And in a very real way, we can use technology and leverage technology to close that gap that we find insofar as low productivity is concerned. I say that to say that our history, peculiar as it is, I believe it was the distinguished representative from Guyana who made reference to the different paths that Singapore and the region would have taken, and I agree with that. But I don't think it is too late for us to use what is available to us, the tools that are currently available, to see how we can close that gap and how we can boost productivity. I believe that the numbers that have been shared with us by your distinguished panelists are demonstrative that if we're able to move that needle in the right direction, I think it unleashes tremendous potential here in our region to be more competitive, to be more productive, and certainly to move the standard of living of our people and of our region to ever increasing and ever higher levels. And so I think this conversation has been very rich. It will be my hope from a policy level that this conversation continues. And whilst I know your chairmanship is short, I'm hopeful that your leading role here has put this firmly on the agenda of the OAS, even though, as I think one of your distinguished speakers would have pointed out, this might not be a traditional approach at the OAS. I think the OAS is concerned about enhancing lives across the region and across the member states. And I believe that this is a worthwhile pursuit. And I've been honored to have been invited and to have participated in this exchange this morning. I think I've learned a lot, and I'm going to certainly take away and have a discussion with my colleagues in cabinet what I see as certainly something that we have to overcome as a country and as a region if we are to succeed and if we are to do and become the type of society and the type of country that I believe we all want. So again, thank you very much. Those will be my final words for today. I want to thank you for the honor of being here and for participating in this very important and special sitting. Thank you, Excellency.
Thank you very much. I would like to say that I too am very, very appreciative of the comments that were offered by the delegates, and certainly with respect to the presentations, I thought they were very much on the mark. Some of them would need somewhat controversial. Some would indeed require an extra effort on our part, but I am very supportive of the inclination and the willingness to really continue to push this issue because it is so very important. We certainly can't allow this situation to go from cradle to the grave in which our per capita income is stuck at a $16,000 level. That's not something that I think that we should be comfortable with. So to ignore the issue is not the solution. I think Ambassador Lynch has made a good point, which you've made to me before, with respect to the importance of trying to reach to the higher levels of income of government. That is very important. This, however, does not mean that the sessions that have been reported today and last week could not be circulated with respect to the members of the cabinets of those several governments. Those sites, those recordings in full detail are available on Facebook. And certainly they can be made available to you, to anyone who would like to receive them. I'd be happy to make them available to you. So again, thanks a great deal. If there are no other delegations wishing to make interventions, and having heard the very informative presentations and comments on the issue, I wish to propose that the Permanent Council take note of the presentations made by the special invited guests, as well as those of the delegations. Dear colleagues, we have concluded consideration of the agenda for today. Before closing the meeting, let me again reiterate my appreciation to His Excellency, the Honorable Mark Brantley, Dr. Larry Quinlan, and Mr. Enrique Perez for their very enlightening presentations. I thank you. This meeting, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, is now adjourned. Thank you.